Okay, we'll get things started here this morning. Good morning and welcome everyone to Friday morning concurrent session number 6. This is the People and Policy Action and Update stream this morning. My name is Jen McNally. I'm the Water Resource Specialist for Portage County, and I'll be moderating this session. As we get started this morning, like Eric said a little bit earlier, if you have questions throughout the presentation, go ahead and drop them in the chat box on the lower right-hand side of your screen. I'll be watching that throughout the presentation, and hopefully then we can circle back to questions after our presenters are done. This session, we're going to be hearing about the Wisconsin DNR Surface Water Grants Program and orientation for 2020 and beyond. And we actually have 3 different presenters, Alison Mikulyuk, Alex Devoy, and Laura McFarland. Alison is an aquatic ecologist and the Lakes and Rivers team leader for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. She administers the Surface Water Grant Program, which provides over $6.5 million annually to protect and improve surface water conditions. She is DNR's director of the Lake Leaders Institute, spokesperson for the Wisconsin Lakes Partnership, and a scientist with a PhD in freshwater and marine sciences from the UW-Madison Center for Limnology. She is excited by the application of sound ecological principles to protect and restore aquatic ecosystems for the benefit of nature and society. Alex is a program assistant with the WDNR Surface Water Grants Program in Madison. She helps with the grant intake and ranking process, answers questions from the public and grantees, works on improvements to guidance materials and forms, and assists with the Clean Boats, Clean Waters program. She went to UW-Madison for both her undergraduate degree and master's degree in water resources management. For her master's practicum, she worked on a large-scale planning grant where she did EVAL modeling for the Beaver Creek subwatershed, which resulted in recommendations to reduce non-point source pollution. And Laura is the WDNR Community Finances Environmental Grants Specialist in the Northern Region. Laura administers the surface water grants in 17 counties, assisting grantees in determining eligibility for grants, applying for grants, seeking reimbursements, and more. She also manages the Clean Boats, Clean Waters program statewide. Prior to joining the WDNR, Laura served as a Trout Unlimited's Great Lakes Stream Restoration Project Manager in northern Wisconsin and the River Alliance of Wisconsin's Aquatic Invasive Species Program Director. So thank you for everyone, and we'll let these ladies take it away.
Great, thanks Jen, and thanks everybody else. I really appreciate you all tuning in to hear this information on the Surface Water Grant Program. I love this program. I think we do a lot of really good work, but we couldn't do it without all of you. So thank you for being here. I'm really excited to tell you about what's coming soon for the Surface Water Grant Program. Next. I'm going to just quickly run through what we're going to cover today. So this is kind of a brief program orientation for 2020 and beyond. We have a large program. It can be complex. There are additional guidance materials and information that we're going to communicate over the course of the summer that'll go into a lot of these things with more detail. But our intention really is to give you here an overview of the program and our efforts to consolidate it. So I'll start with a basic structure. And then for those of you who might be familiar with the program already and use it to fund the excellent work that you do in Wisconsin, Alex is going to kind of take you through a matching between the old program and the activities that you're used to supporting with surface water grants and how that kind of maps out onto the new program. Cliff Notes is we're still supporting a lot of the same great stuff. I will briefly run through some of the main steps in applying for a grant. Laura will get into some important information on managing projects and administering projects under the new program. And then I'll come back in and tell you about some of our efforts for ongoing communication. We intend to leave a lot of time for questions and answers. So if you see anything that piques your interest that you want to know a little bit more about, just go ahead and enter that into the chat window. And without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so you may have heard the Surface Water Grant Program has a new look for 2020. Many of you might be familiar with this program already. Eric brought it up at the prep plenary that we just all listened to. This is the grant program that's funded by gas tax. We get about $6.5 million annually, and the overall purpose of the The program is to support projects that protect and restore lakes, rivers, and wetlands, and to prevent and control aquatic invasive species. Next. We recently consolidated this program that used to be administered under 5 separate administrative rules. Our goals for the consolidation were to unite the subprogram procedures and policies and make them a little bit easier to navigate. We took the opportunity to update the program, and we allow it now to support better, I think, watershed management and implementation. We also use this time to enhance accountability. Next. And this is what the new program looks like. You'll see that we cover a diverse range of activities from education and planning all the way through land protection, AIS control, and implementation. You'll notice that you won't see separate programs anymore for lakes and rivers and AIS. These are all now under one administrative rule. Even though, you know, the look of the program is changing a little bit, we hope it's easier to navigate. And you'll notice that a lot of the stuff that was under the old program is still represented here in this consolidated rule. So you can see we support a pretty diverse set of projects. Next. And essentially, we've got you covered for surface water management from start to finish. There are still activities that can help you organize and educate your group. You can collect data, plan for management, design projects, and implement them. So I'm going to run through our 7 major subprograms in a little bit more detail and just give you some ideas of the project types that are under each category. Next. First, we have education grants. These support efforts to give information and education to the public and to groups, and also can help you develop your organization and build its capacity. Next. Planning grants can range from efforts to go out and collect data and assess ecosystem condition, to designing projects for implementation, to full-scale comprehensive management planning, where you create a dynamic living document that sets a blueprint for management for years to come. Next. Surface water management covers a diverse range of activities. You can develop ordinances, you can execute healthy lakes and rivers, DIY landowner-focused implementation projects. You can implement any approved recommendation that is in a plan that you may have written with a planning grant. And new for this year, you can also do a larger set of surface water restoration practices without a management plan. So you don't need a management plan for eligibility for these things that follow NRCS standards. They're a little bit larger in scale than Healthy Lakes projects, but are basically good ideas for lakes. Go ahead. The AIS control program includes AIS prevention, early detection and response projects, large and small scale AIS population control, and research and development. Next. Land acquisition includes funds available to purchase land, so fee simple land acquisition for conservation purposes, and the enactment of conservation easements. County Lake Grants is a new program, and it's focused on protection. So money under this program can be dedicated to projects that help plan protection and implement protection plans at the county level. Next. And then finally, the Lake Monitoring and Protection Network is a source of predictable annual funding for counties and their designated agents to carry out network cooperative services to protect, prevent AIS and monitor lakes. And next. So that's our program in a nutshell. Different sub-programs support a ton of really awesome things. You know, so if any of these project types seem like something that you'd be interested in or might help your lake, we suggest you dig in further and learn how to come in for funding. And with that, I'll hand it over to Alex.
Thanks. So keeping that new program structure in mind, we can take a deeper look into the specific activities that you might be seeing under the different grant categories. I'm going to walk through some of the previous programs grant types and kind of map their activities onto the new program. You'll see on the left-hand side, the kind of old program, and then the new program on the right-hand side, NR 193. And so just starting with what you may be used to doing with AIS education, prevention, and planning grants, you aren't going to see much of a change for Clean Boats, Clean Waters. It's going to continue to be running as a program, and it should be a pretty smooth transition for grants funding ILIDs or CD3 units. Those are going to be under the AIS prevention grant category with $4,000 for any landing with an active CBCW program or $24,000 for department approved projects. AIS coordinators, like mentioned before, are transitioning to the Lake Monitoring and Protection Network, which is a relatively large change for that type of activity, but it's going to provide consistency in funding those positions using a set allocation for each county. And then your education workshops, organization development projects are going to be funded under the surface water education grant category. And then the types of like assessments, surveys, aquatic plant management plan development or updates are going to be under either surface water planning or comprehensive planning for lakes and watersheds, kind of depending on the scale of the project. Next slide. So for aquatic invasive species control and early detection and response grants, you're going to see there's still the AIS early detection and response grants. The cap increased a little bit to $25,000, and then you're still going to have that focus on education, population monitoring, and AIS control. And then the AIS control grant categories are going to be now sort of split into the large scale population management, which is going to be more of the larger scale, longer term, multi-season suppression of established species. And then you're going to see the small scale population management, which, like the title, is smaller scale and focuses kind of on continued suppression of established species. Next slide. For the lake planning grants, you may notice them or recognize them as SPL as for small scale lake planning or LPL for large scale lake planning. And again, you're going to see the education and outreach, workshops, organization development, those types of projects under surface water education. And then you'll see the aquatic plant management or lake management plan development or updates, assessments and surveys, which can include identifying data gaps, social surveys, water body or watershed assessments, pre-implementation planning for best management practices. Those kind of projects can be found again under surface water planning or comprehensive planning for lakes and watersheds. Next slide. The lake protection grants. So you'll see that the land acquisition, lake land acquisition program is pretty similar. We're still going to have land acquisition easement grant type grants. Healthy Lakes is undergoing a change to Healthy Lakes and Rivers, which is pretty great, expanding the program to allow properties within 300 feet of a river to be eligible for the best management practices already outlined in the program. And then lake classification and ordinance development grants, which are usually used by counties. They're typically focus on developing ordinances and do countywide protection plans, and that can be to develop local lake management plans or do things like countywide shoreline protection type grants, and then those are going to be now found under ordinance development or county lake grants for those protection focused grants. Next slide. And then we get into probably one of the most varied grants and types of projects that come in under lake management plan implementation. We're still going to have those same sorts of projects funded under the lake and watershed plan implementation grant type. And that's going to have sort of your non-point source pollution control and incentives, kind of like agricultural BMPs in some places, incentives for that. Habitat restoration and water quality improvement projects. There will also be management staffing projects for technical support and implementation of best management practices, and also projects that can provide a better understanding of a system. So like more in-depth studies for an aspect of water quality that maybe was brought up as something that you need to understand better or something in a lake management plan. You can use those grants for that. And then the wetland shoreland habitat restoration grants you may be familiar with typically used NRCS standards. Those you're going to kind of see in the lake restoration grant type. And then with those grants, that's kind of expanding the different types of projects that can be implemented without a plan using those NRCS standards. And then I've also included wetland restoration incentives grants as well, but those were also previously available before NR 193, but it might be interesting to look into since I don't know how many, I don't think we've gotten too many of those grants in. Next slide. For river planning, this again should look very familiar to the both the AIS education, prevention and planning and lake planning grants. You're going to still see the education, outreach, workshops, organization development in the surface water education grant category. And then we still are helping to fund the formation of river organizations under that surface water education category. And then the development of river plans and assessments and surveys, those sort of things can also be found under surface water planning and comprehensive planning for lakes and watersheds. Next slide. And then for river management grants, again, we still have the land acquisition easement grants under the river land acquisition, and then implementation projects like regrading streams, erosion prevention, stream connectivity, and fish passage projects are still going to be found under the river plan implementation or river restoration. As you can see, the plan implementation or restoration projects kind of, again, follows, kind of mirrors what you're seeing in the lake plan implementation and lake restoration, but for rivers. Next slide. And so after going through a lot of these familiar activities that were funded previously in the program, I think you can see that a lot of what you're doing can still be funded within this new grant program under NR 193. And then while the structure and titles of the grants may be changing, many of the types of eligible activities are going to be the same or expanded. And then kind of with this refresher, if you look at the different NR 193 grant types in the middle here, and then look at the white boxes on the outside, those are sort of the old programs. You can see that it's pretty consolidated and a lot of the stuff is going to stay the same. So just if you take that and think about the new program, I guess this might give you ideas of things that you might want to do or fund in the future, but I'll let Alison walk through the steps of getting a grant.
Great. Thank you, Alex. So there are 5 main steps to getting a grant, and I'm going to run through each in a little bit more detail so you can know what to expect and can prepare for the upcoming cycle. One quick note before we start. All of this that we're talking about right now is currently in development and is technically considered draft. So at the end of the presentation, I'll come back and tell you how you can kind of stay involved, read our guidance document, and get the the additional information that you might be seeking. There's also an opportunity to engage in the development process for our program guidance. We have a draft version now, but this is just a first draft. So we are looking to take your input and your opinions on what the program looks like now. We anticipate this rule successfully being published in the Administrative Register soon. So we're looking to June as our likely go date. And shortly after that happens, then we will be able to release our public guidance document for formal public comment period. But we'd love to get feedback before that happens so we can, make the best guidance document that is, clear and helps you understand how to navigate our program. So just so you know, this is all kind of considered draft. I took a lot of this from our upcoming guidance document, and this is sort of where we are at this moment. So step one is to determine your eligibility. We have expanded eligibility under the new program. In the past, for example, a lot of nonprofits needed to have as part of their mission statement this purpose of buying land. Well, that's no longer true because who owns the water, right? Surface water management organizations, nonprofit organizations that do surface water management are now eligible for our grants. In addition, people who are eligible or organizations eligible for one category are generally eligible across the entire program. So no longer do we need to kind of understand the patchwork of who is able to get what grant. So with those changes in eligibility, we ask that everyone confirm their eligibility under the new program. Anytime you could start, in soon, just basically by contacting your environmental grant specialist. But you basically would fill out an application or verify your application eligibility. And we ask that this happens in advance of the deadline because sometimes, unforeseen changes need to happen to the bylaws or, there's kind of an issue with eligibility. And that sometimes takes some time and meetings to figure out. So it's best if it occurs far in advance of the deadline. And we recommend by May 1st. Next. The second thing that you'll do is start to develop a project. So we gave you a brief introduction to the kinds of programs we have and the sorts of projects that we'd like to see come in. But those are just ideas. So the first thing you need to do is think about filling that idea out a little bit more with concrete goals and objectives. And your local lakes biologist can be a wonderful resource to help you develop a project under the new program. So, it's best if you engage their help early in the process. So, as soon as your group is kind of thinking of moving toward developing a surface water grant application, I would let your local biologist know. There's an important part of technical assistance that can happen. They can help review questions about eligibility for the program, and they can really set you up to compete well in this fairly competitive program. It is required to notify them of your intent to apply for a grant now under the new program, and that needs to happen by September 2nd. So even if you're a very confident grant writer and you've done lots of projects before, every year we still ask that there be a notification that can just be a phone call or an email. And if you can communicate your brief project plan or summary at that time, the biologist can determine if there needs to be some sort of follow-up technical assistance or project review. You can also feel free to call a meeting at any time as well, but definitely do that by September 2nd. Your local biologist there's a contact list that will be published in the guidance document. Right now, you can actually go online to the Surface Water Grants website and see, the guidance document for our current program, and in that is a big list of local biologists. You can also find it on the DNR website, and basically each biologist has a certain number of counties part of their region. And I think Alex has just pasted the current website with the information there. If you click on the guidance document, you can find your phone number and your email to contact your folks. Okay, so that's project development. And step 3, you need to start working on an application. So that involves, thinking critically about your goals and objectives and the methods and the activities that you're actually going to do to accomplish your goals. So you need to prepare a budget. Our program is a cost-sharing program. So, for planning projects, your organization needs to come up with or solicit support or in-kind donations that make up 33% of the total project cost. And for management, it's 25%. So you need to kind of figure out how you're going to meet those cost-share requirements. And then you start working on an application form. So we are revising the application form to make it easier to fill out under the new program. We don't have that quite ready yet, but it's in development, and I imagine in the next month or so we'll have that posted on our website. So you'll fill out the application, you'll integrate all that technical advice and assistance that your local biologist gave you, describe exactly what you're going to do, be really clear about the deliverables, and you'll submit that by November 1st of 2020. Now that's a big change from where we were before in the program. Under the old program, we had to split the cycle into management and planning segments. And that often resulted in having to kind of guess at the amount of money that we would want to save and keep on the table for the second cycle. And unfortunately, that sometimes led to deserving projects from the first round not getting funded. So by moving to a single deadline, now we're able to use all of the money that we have available to fund the best work possible. We'll be able to kind of match the funding source with the applications that come in at one time, and we have a real clear picture about all the work that people want to do and how we're going to be able to support it. So that is moving forward to November 1st, and that's because under the current system, we're not meeting our fiscal and financial encumbrance deadlines. So this is the time that the department needs to start reviewing applications so that we can actually encumber funds by the end of the fiscal year. Next. Now, after you submit your application, the application review and ranking process starts. It will be reviewed and scored by an independent group of agency and partner experts. And we'll actually go through and review the application and the information that you supplied using criteria that's been established for every grant type. So the criteria reflects program priorities and talks about, the aspects of projects or programs that, we think are really important for surface waters. And that criteria is very clearly published in guidance. So if you get a hold of the guidance document, you can see exactly the way that your application is being ranked and the points that are available to kind of objectively weigh the strengths and weaknesses of a given project. And that's really helpful to write a strong application, so you know that you're kind of covering all the bases that you need to. Ranking sheets will be available in early summer. We actually have a draft version in the guidance document that we have now for you to take a look at, but we can make changes all the way up until the public comment period in summer. And then after the ranking sheets and the reviewers are done with their job, we basically average the score of 3 different reviewers, and that final score determines the order in which we apply funding. Next. We planned initially an in-person workshop to talk a little bit in more detail about the grant program and the changes that are coming down the pipes. And we had a section in there about grant writing. And I just wanted to give you a couple of tips because we kind of sat back and thought, what are the reasons that we see applications that are really strong and they're fantastic projects? Like what are the main weaknesses that if we could address, would allow folks to compete more successfully? And I think, the 3 main things that I would boil it down to would be a failure in alignment. So that would be a project that's just not quite matched with the priorities that, again, are published in guidance as ranking criteria. So it's really critical to kind of look at those objective criteria and ask, okay, is the project that I'm proposing in alignment with these priorities? If it is, it's more likely to rank higher. The second thing that I usually see is a failure in specificity. So if you think about grant writing, it's kind of like telling a really technical story. You want to make the story rich and you want to be able to really clearly communicate exactly what's going to happen. You want to think about who, what, when, where, why, and how when you write a grant application. All of those things should be clear and really easy to read so that the rankers don't have to spend much time kind of searching for information in the application. And then second, concise. Good writing isn't wordy. That's a lot of stuff: who, what, when, where, why, and how. And projects are complex, but it is easy to use few words to describe like the very most important parts of your project. And concise applications are just easier to read and easier to rank. It's just good advice for grant writing. You really are trying to kind of write so that the rankers and the biologists can understand exactly what you're going to do. So just specific down to the level of exactly what method you're proposing to use for a given data collection effort, for example. Next. So I just wanted to review the important deadlines here on the table. Again, we talked about first, determine organization eligibility. Second thing, you want to think about notification of the intent to apply. So by September 2nd, call your regional biologist, tell them you're thinking about a project. Now, you don't have to have a final answer of what you want to do at that point. You really can, you can ask for their help at that point, essentially, the further away you are from a final plan, the earlier I would recommend you contact your biologist. And then folks who have applied for implementation grants before know that there's a procedure in place to verify that an implementation project is consistent with a recommendation in a management plan that is approved by the department. So at that same time that you do the general notification, you would also want to make sure to submit that recommendation for approval for eligibility. So I think folks who are in the implementation realm are familiar with this. It's the same for AIS control grants. So it's making sure that a particular recommendation or project is eligible under the program. And then November 1 is the application deadline. Yeah, thank you, Eric.
All right, thank you, Allie. And Alex, this is Laura McFarland, and I just want to take a second to point out that my bio was severely outdated, and that goes to show just how early we start planning for convention each year. Since November, I've been serving as the Surface Water Grant Program Manager. Formerly, I was the Northern Region Environmental Grant Specialist, and I work within the Bureau of Community Financial Assistance, or CF as we call it for short. And a CF, for those of you who are not familiar with our role in the program, works very closely with Allie's Bureau to implement the Surface Water Grant Program. And really our primary role is, as environmental grant specialists, is to assist you guys, our grantees, in ensuring that the funds allocated by the legislature for the grant program are spent in accordance with state statute and the administrative code. And in order to do this, we develop guidance on financial administration of grant funds and financial reporting requirements. It really is our goal to make these processes as easy as streamlined as possible, and we're constantly working to do that, and greatly appreciate your feedback. And that's why today I'm going to spend a few minutes kind of talking about some of the new elements incorporated into NR 193. That we hope will ensure responsible and accountable spending of the public's tax dollars. The sooner we can get these concepts out in front of you, the more time it gives you to provide helpful feedback as to how we can better serve you. As we've seen through the years, the demand for surface water grants have increased in many of our grant categories, exceeding the available funding. And we really feel it is in the best interest of our grantees and the public for us to implement cost savings measures to allow our limited resources to go further. Basically, we want more bang for our buck, right? We want to do more for the resource. We want to accomplish as much as we can for our surface waters in the state of Wisconsin with the funding available. So today I'll be highlighting a few of these cost savings measures that were incorporated into the revised administrative rule and the draft guidance. Before I do, though, I do want to review our generally accepted accounting principles. For those of you that are familiar with our existing grant program guidance, you probably recognize this verbiage. We have and will continue to require that all grantees follow these basic principles. These principles will not change. And so they entail maintaining all financial records related to the project for required time frame that will be specified within your grant agreement. We require that you document all project expenditures in sufficient detail to indicate the exact nature of the expenditure. All supporting documentation must be labeled with the grant number. We do have grantees with multiple grants, and it is really important that your invoices specify what expense should be attributed to which grant. We ask that you comply with all applicable state and federal laws regarding cost containment bidding, contract awards, wage, and labor rates. And last but not least, you must report your expenditures using the grant payment request worksheet that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. This worksheet will not be changing. All right, so now that we've kind of got the old business behind us, we're going to move on to a new measure that we are implementing that I think will generate a lot of questions, and that is the professional service agreements that we will be requiring moving forward. First of all, I do want to emphasize this does not apply to counties, cities, towns, villages, or tribes. Again, does not apply to counties, cities, towns, villages, and tribes. I really should have put that on the slide here today, and I forgot to do that. But during our ruling drafting process, you may have heard about this new requirement. The new code says that professional service agreements are required if you hire a consultant or a third-party service provider at a cost in excess of $5,000. It also says that the code also states that a form will be specified, and I'm going to share a draft of this form with you in just a moment. This form or a substantially similar document is required prior to the commencement of work, not at the time of application. However, I have drafted this form in a way that I hope that it can also be used as a tool by grantees to capture costs from consultants when preparing your budget, especially if your project, if you're going to be working with multiple consultants. That way you can, or not just consultants, third-party service providers. And that way you can compile that information, those various components of any project into the application. And we'll talk about that more in a second. But you may be asking, well, what's the purpose of this professional service agreement? Is this just another layer of bureaucracy? and I hope the answer is no, it's not just another layer of bureaucracy. Really, the purpose is to ensure that both parties, the service provider and the grantee, understand the scope of services and the costs associated before the commencement of the project. One benefit of a sound PSA is recourse by the grantee in the event that the consultant did substandard or incomplete work. PSAs must include a statement that states that the final payment from the grantee to the consultant will not be made until the DNR approves the final product. As you know, our agency withholds the final payment until the final product is approved. And unfortunately, there have been times where our grantees, typically like associations or districts, have paid their consultants their final invoice. The consultant had submitted a draft of the final project that unfortunately did not meet the requirements of the grant. Thus, the department did not reimburse the grantee. And as far as the consultant was concerned, their obligation to the project was fulfilled. And we hope that we can help our lake associations and our lake districts from finding themselves in this predicament in the future by providing what we hope is a useful and an easy tool. All right, next slide, please. So this is just a draft, and it isn't necessarily complete. But what I'm working to do to make this as easy on you guys as possible is to create a form that aligns with the grant application, ultimately enabling a grantee or a consultant to copy and paste activities, timelines, methods, and deliverables of the portion of a project for which the agent is hired to complete directly into the application, because as you can see here, it identifies who the grantee is, who the consultant or the third-party service provider is, and then it identifies the scopes of services being provided by that company, the budget, and then it states basically that any changes of work have to be approved before they can move forward, and that and then we'll include that statement that you will not receive a final payment until the final product is approved. Now, like I said before, you do not have to use this form. Our code stated that we would specify a form. This is optional. You may have a substantially similar document. Many of you, like districts and like associations, may in the past have had contracts with consultants or service providers. And if you have, that's great. You'll want to ensure with you want to check with your EGS to ensure that the language in those contracts meet the requirements of our PSAs. Alternatively, you can use this form. And so we'll be seeking your feedback. I'm very curious to know if what your thoughts are on this process throughout the comment period. All right, Eric, next one, please. All right, so land use agreements. Land use agreements aren't necessarily new to our program, but we are requiring that you enter into a land use agreement with a non-grantee landowner participating in a proposed project no later than the date on which the department issues a grant agreement. Now, we are allowing, for the purposes of application, that you submit a letter of intent to sign a land use agreement from the land manager or owner. This is because it may not be feasible to or might not be, it might be just an extra unnecessary step in the event that you were to not be funded. But by the time we actually send you an agreement, you'll need to have that land use agreement in place. And these are for projects where examples can be the installation of remote watercraft surveillance video technology like you see here. It could be, or it could be the implementation of best management practices, etc. Now, the Healthy Lakes program has their own form or their own template, and that will not change. Cost containment. All right, as we've talked about, cost containment is a major goal. We do hope to, like I said, make our dollars go a little bit further and ensure that we are reusing our state taxpayer dollars as responsible as possible. So a grantee must, under the new code, implement cost containment measures if the cost of a project expense exceeds $2,500. At the time of application, the department may request that the grantee submit proof of cost containment procedures if we suspect that if any of the costs within the application should raise any red flags. If it is far exceeds what we have seen in the past, we may ask for that cost containment at the time of application. Otherwise, the grantee is required to identify cost containment procedures when they request reimbursement. And we have outlined several methods of cost containment within the code itself, and described in guidance. The first being average cost. So you can use cost information obtained within 12 months prior to the start date of a grant agreement, determine an average cost per unit of material or labor for the implementation of activities. So yeah, so that's one I think is relatively self-explanatory. The second is competitive bidding. Following the requirements under Chapter 16 of state statutes, a grantee may request bids from contractors for the implementation of practices listed in the grant agreements. Applicants may wish to review the procurement guide available on the Surface Water Grant Program website to assist with this process. The third is a flat rate. The department has included in our new guidance established flat rates for common eligible costs. These were arrived at by analyzing grant budgets submitted in recent years. And so an applicant or a grantee may choose to use the department's flat rate as one means of cost containment. So look for those cost containment calculations or estimates in the new guidance. The fourth is force account. A grantee may assign its employees to implement a practice at their going rate, if you will. And then fifth is alternative, and also in guidance, not listed here above, is alternative cost containment measures. So a grantee may propose an alternative cost containment procedure if the alternative is determined to be more effective than the cost containment procedures described prior. So the grantee should identify the alternative in the grant application it submits for review and approval by the department. So I encourage you guys to read up on cost containment within the guidance and share your thoughts. And then depreciation of equipment. Again, the concept of depreciation is not new within our program. In the past, our agency maybe has not been the most consistent in our approach to the depreciation of equipment. We've received guidance from the finance department that have changed throughout the years as to how to I guess implement depreciation, or to I guess enforce depreciation of equipment. So moving forward, the depreciation of equipment is required if it has a value of $5,000 or more, whether it be donated or purchased, or if the total components of a customized piece of equipment is $5,000 or more. So if you have, for instance, a water quality meter and the various components of that water quality meter added up is more than $5,000, that piece of equipment must be depreciated. So I'm going to provide you a little example in case those of you some of you are not familiar with this concept. So suppose, like I said, this water sampling equipment cost, let's say $6,000 to purchase by the time you add up all the components. And since the value is greater than $5,000, the equipment is considered a capital asset and it should be depreciated for grant purposes. And suppose that the water sampling equipment has a useful life of 10 years. So for a planning grant with a 3-year term, we would divide the 6,000 by the useful life, the 10 years, and then we would multiply that by 3 years, which is the term of the grant. And so you would be eligible, the eligible expenses for that grant would be $1,800 for that equipment. So you could not charge the grant the entire $6,000. You would only be eligible of $1,800. Again, this will be in the guidance. Proportional share of costs. I think, again, this is not a new concept to our grant program. I just wanted to point it out that if you have an item or a service that is only partially used for the implementation of a project, you are required to only to capture what the proportional share of cost for the project was. So you must provide a proof of purchase, the total cost of the item, and a detailed explanation of the proportion of the item used for the implementation of the project. So an example would be like a multifunctional copy machine in an office. What percentage of that what percentage of that machine's time was spent on this particular project would have to be determined. And administrative costs. This is the last element that I'm going to talk about today. But administrative costs. This is a new change. But direct administrative costs, both cash and in kind, are limited to 10% now and are held until the final reimbursement. So 90% of the grant expenses must be spent on achieving the goals and objectives of the project, and a maximum of 10% may be spent on administration. Now, I know that this will be a little gray to a lot of you, but essentially what this means is that any cost incurred by immediate supervisors or support staff that can be tracked and charged directly to and accounted for by the project, these must be limited to 10%. So, so these are staff that are not involved in the day-to-day implementation of the project. And if you have any questions as to whether or not a cost is an administrative cost or not, I encourage you to direct these questions to myself or your environmental grant specialist to determine that when you're developing your budget at the onset. All right, so in order for you to keep track of some of these new requirements, at the time of reimbursement, we have compiled a reimbursement request checklist. This will be within the new guidance, and then it'll also be a standalone document that you can keep within your grant folder or with your project materials to remind you what you are going to need at the tail end when you come in to seek reimbursement to make sure that you are eligible for your entire reimbursement. So this first, I'm just going to go through it. It was too large to put on one page, but these first few ones, these have not changed. Your progress or final report must be submitted. Your grant payment request form must be submitted, the 8700-01, which most of you are familiar with. Your proof of purchase for all purchase supplies and equipment. Next, Eric. Your donated volunteer labor worksheets and donated equipment usage worksheets, these have not changed, nor has the donated professional services worksheets. And as most of you are familiar, you do not have to necessarily use these worksheets. You can provide equivalent documentation. Many of you have your own forms that you would like to use, or simply submit invoices from your professional services that are donated. Next. All right, so now we're kind of into some of these new elements, the professional service agreement, the recorded land use agreement, and the cost containment supporting documentation. And I think there's one more slide. Then again, the supporting documentation for depreciation of equipment and proportional share of costs. All right.
Thanks, Laura.
Yeah, I think that's all I have.
Yeah, so, okay, that was a lot of information. This is not the only chance you'll have to hear about it though. So just wanted to tell you a little bit about how to stay involved, how to get more information if you'd like, how to help us get to a final version of our program guidance, and how to stay abreast of updates and announcements. So first of all, we have a new communications page. It works for me with my browsing history to just Google NR 193. So that is the name of our new administrative code, and that will get you to, what we're calling kind of our new communications page. It'll have a different look in about 2 weeks, but right now it kind of highlights the code consolidation and our rule revision process, but you'll see a new box that we just posted yesterday that gives you a link to our guidance document. Now, the whole document is present there as a PDF. It's something like 140 pages long. Again, really like huge program. We've got the ranking sheets in there. There are a bunch of appendices that aren't really officially part of the guidance, but we think are really helpful. So it's there in its long form, but we've also selected like 4 different shorter form pieces that are a little bit more easy to digest, that kind of give you a broad overview and describe the program there. So again, you can Google NR 193 or go to the URL there in the communications page. And actually, let me just pull that up and send that over to you guys in the chat window. And then again, we have the Surface Water Grants homepage. So what you're seeing now is the old program there, and that's we put a link earlier in the chat to that current, so sort of like our official web portal. We can't move to the new program until it's actually law, and the legislative processes are what they are, and that is going to happen probably in June. So we can't kind of go formally over to the new program until it's legal. So that's why you're kind of seeing this early summer timeline, unfortunately, I guess. But we're moving as fast as we can. We will update it after promulgation in June, and that's where you'll find kind of all of the information, the resources, the forms, everything that you'll need to navigate the program. If you would like to stay abreast of informational updates, and that's including, the rule revision and consolidation, so notifications of public comment periods, changes to that website, you can sign up for our Gov Delivery newsletter. If you go to that NR 193 page that I just linked in the chat, you'll see a red envelope that looks kind of like a speech bubble in the right-hand column of the screen. Click that and sign up, and that'll put you on a newsletter. We don't use it often, so you won't get a lot of spam, but we do use it to communicate important program time points and updates. So you'll hear about the revision, you'll hear about public comment, but we'll also push information there about upcoming deadlines and how you might navigate the program. So I do encourage you to do that as sort of like our formal communication channel. And then in addition, those of you who signed up for the the interactive workshop that we had planned for convention, and those of you who are on that Gov Delivery list will soon get a forthcoming survey. And we're going to use the information that we collect in that survey to plan webinars and trainings that we'll hold this summer. We'll definitely have some online opportunities kind of like this, but maybe in a little bit more detail, and opportunities for you to interact with us one-on-one and ask questions. We are also considering taking that workshop that we planned for the convention and doing it this summer if and when it becomes safe and advisable to do so. So if you get a link to that survey, I would appreciate your information. It'll help us fulfill your needs and communicate about this new program and these new opportunities in the best and most efficient way that we can. So with that, I really appreciate your time and encourage you to dig into more information. I think we can take questions.
All right, so we have a bunch of different questions, and I noticed that Alison have been answering some of them throughout. So some of the earlier ones, I would encourage you to go back and kind of check and see if those had been answered. I know there were a couple questions regarding the finding of the biologists for your area, and I know they posted links in the chat box for that. So make sure you scroll back up and see if you can find those. So I'm going to try and get through some of the quick and easy ones a little bit first. Is it correct that the dam grants have not been incorporated into this program?
That's correct.
Okay. We had a couple of questions regarding the professional service agreements. Do those professional service agreements apply to lake districts and or sanitary districts, which are forms or units of government?
The language in the code says that the section does not apply to counties, cities, towns, villages, and tribes.
That's right. So special districts must still
They'll
comply.
use those. Okay. And then do the specialist service agreements apply to contracting with something, say, like the regional planning commissions for services?
Yes, they would still apply.
Okay. And then would those professional service agreements been required for the Healthy Lakes grants in 2020?
I would be curious to know what everybody's thoughts on that. Typically, we don't see a lot of expenses in excess of the $2,500 for Healthy Lake grants. But yes, and generally they would.
Okay.
Or is it $5,000 is the professional service agreement limit, I think? 25 is cost containment, right?
Yes, correct. Sorry. Pardon me.
Which actually is a good segue, because our next question has to do with the cost of containment. Is that in effect for a total project cost over 2,500, or is that for a single light item of 2,500? And does this include staff wages for a project?
That is for a single line item, and force account is a cost containment measure. Using your own staff is considered cost containment. So you should be good there.
Okay. The next question asked is data reporting an admin expense? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I do not believe it would be.
Like, would this be like entering data into SWIMS?
I'm not sure. There wasn't any more.
I would say that's a project. That's a necessary project activity.
I would agree.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So then somebody had asked the question, what changes are being made to help or improve, streamline the grant tracking and reporting processes?
Is this on a financial side of things or the kind of deliverable reporting?
Maybe you could speak to financials, Laura, and I could color in.
Yeah, I think what the department is working on is rolling out a new e-grants program in the next year. I think we're looking at about probably 2 years before e-grants goes live online. And so a lot of the reporting, I guess, efforts to streamline reporting is actually kind of being rolled into that effort. So you won't see a lot of changes in the interim. And I would say just give us a bit more time on that as we work towards this larger objective.
Yeah, agreed. And from a like a project reporting and management perspective, it's one of my goals to move to a standardized report form. So think of something that maybe comes on SurveyMonkey in response to a DAT cap grant, for example. I think it would be really valuable if we could reflect our program's outputs and outcomes a little bit more readily. We don't have a standardized report form now, and there isn't going to be one required in guidance yet, because we're going to kind of, again, as Laura mentioned with the financial side, we're going to take advantage of these new tools provided by eGrants, which will be this kind of online application and project tracking web-based software. And when we move to that new program, that's when you might start to see some streamlined reporting elements. But for now, again, it's sort of business as usual. The final deliverables that are promised in the grant application should be submitted to the local biologist for approval, and then we'll start the reimbursement process from there.
Okay, we're still getting questions in, and I realize that we're getting close to the end of the time. So after this is the lunch break. So if everyone is okay with it, if you want to hear some of the answers to the questions, we might run over a little bit. Is that okay with you guys who are presenting if we run over just a few minutes to try and get through some more of these questions?
Absolutely.
Sure.
Okay, excellent. So the next question asked, if you submit multiple reimbursement requests throughout the life of the grant, must you submit the cost containment documentation for every reimbursement submission, or is just one enough for the entire grant?
No, absolutely not, Dan. You can submit, if it's a single line item and you have cost containment, if you want to submit that the first reimbursement request, and then in the future, maybe you just remind your EGS if they request it again that you've already submitted it.
Okay. So then there was a question, will the current 2020 grant projects need to follow the new reporting rules after they are made into law this summer? Oh, we stumped the presenters.
Yeah. I don't want to say it depends, but I think we need to determine what exactly, how we'll implement all of the minute changes.
Yeah, again, I think it's important to realize that not a lot is changing there with reporting, so I don't anticipate any big surprises in the short term. When we move over to e-grants, that we'll have to make kind of a program-wide decision of whether or not we transition entirely to that new program and import in the old, or kind of phase out the in-progress projects.
Yeah, I think the question probably related to kind of like the PSAs and the cost containments and the kind of the new elements in the financial reporting side of things. And I would say no. I mean, we're going to implement each grant. We always try to implement each grant as consistently as we can through the letter of the law. So, I mean, some of you may have been on board when, Jane Mikulyuk left and I came on as new EGS. I really strive to implement each grant consistently throughout its lifetime within the letter of the law. And I'd venture to say we're going to continue to do that. But if you have questions, please reach out to your EGS.
Okay. So it said, somebody had made the comment that regional planning commissions are not allowed to bid against consultants. So does that mean that the PSAs can no longer be used with them?
That is something I was not aware of. Let's come back to that question a little bit later down the line.
Okay. And then there was a question that large capital equipment previously funded by the Waterways Commission is not superseded by these grants. Is that correct?
I think they're talking specifically there, like about harvesters, right?
Yeah.
I think so.
Yes.
And that as far as we know, those grants will keep going, the Waterways grants.
Yep.
Okay, so then it says, can you clarify the $5,000 depreciation, i.e. useful life change? For example, how would it apply to an $8,000 ILIDS installation?
Yeah, the ILIDS installations. Yeah, so in the past, because we had a $4,000 limit to ILIDS, we did not really apply our depreciation rules that were technically in place even prior. However, there will be groups that are eligible for additional funds. We will be depreciating ILIDS. And so you basically have a 3-year grant agreement. And if you have an $8,000 unit and say that it has a 10-year life expectancy or useful life, you would take 8,000 divided by 10 times 3, and that is the cost that you would be eligible for. And that is a change. That is most certainly a change.
Okay. I want to circle back to our last 2 questions that came from a little bit earlier. So one of the questions is, in the new model award announcements, if they're not made until early summer, that could be problematic for programs that do not receive awards, but yet want to try and attempt to move forward with some of these projects. Do you have any thoughts or comments on that?
Maybe there was a misunderstanding. The award announcements will still happen at, pretty similar time to what they're coming out now. So early spring, late winter.
Okay. All right, great.
The announcements for the new program, again, it sort of depends on legislative processes that will start in early summer. So this is kind of a one-time thing for this coming year.
And those are the announcements of the rules themselves, the final rules,
the
not
funding
the
should
announcement of who was awarded a grant. It's just that until you get through to the final point in the approval process, these are all sort of tentative or draft, right?
That's exactly right, Eric. Thanks.
Okay.
There was another question about DNR approval earlier.
Yep.
Okay, sorry, Jen.
Oh, no. Go ahead. If you want to address that kind of at the same time as all of this, that'd be great.
Cool. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what it was referencing to, but I think it came during the time that I was talking about management, implementation, and ACI control grants. And, we're talking about eligibility of projects for those implementation funds. And in terms of the specific requirements for DNR approval, again, know that September 2nd deadline is the last time that you can request that approval. So try to get them in before that. But essentially, you would submit to the department a description of the activities that you're intending to put under an implementation or AIS control grant. You would then, include the citation to the recommending management plan and describe the public process and public comment period that you use to communicate to the stakeholders. That is essentially the same as what we require now for eligibility determination. And then in terms of figuring out whether or not that's approvable, the biologist will be looking at the approving or citing management plan and kind of thinking broadly about our program priorities. So do these, is this in line with the recommendations? Will these activities prevent pollution, protect surface water or surface water ecosystems, or improve them, or otherwise kind of be consistent with the purposes granted for our program by statute?
All right, great. And then I think there was one more, and then I think we'll have touched on just about all of them. So there was a request, if you could elaborate on when you said that an application will be reviewed and scored by an independent group of experts. The question was, are these DNR staff that are reviewing these grants?
Fantastic. Yeah, by and large, yes, but we also make use of our program expert partners too. So you'll sometimes see folks from University Extension pitching into the grant application review process. But in terms of our procedure internally, every application will be reviewed by 3 independent reviewers. We always have one regional biologist per review team so that they can integrate, their on-the-ground program knowledge into each application review. And we also ensure that 2 out of the 3 total reviewers have experience ranking grants before. So to kind of leverage their ability to grant consistency and bring their program knowledge and their knowledge of the grant program to bear. We don't throw 3 new people at this task. We really strive for objectivity and program consistency. And then local biologists who may have done, a lot of work to help you develop the technical aspects of your program, for example, they don't review projects in their own regions because oftentimes they're, really close to projects. So we like to have sort of an adjunct or kind of on the side group of reviewers who are program experts, but are in a good position to really weigh everything objectively. So that's kind of how the review process works. I hope I was able to answer your question.
I think so. Well, I think that's it. And I think we made our way through most of the questions. I want to thank all of our speakers for all the great information regarding the grants program for this year, and then from all of our attendees as well. Coming up, of course, after this is lunch following this session. So we want to encourage you to take a moment and step away from your computer, take a walk, stretch, prepare yourself for the next sessions. Concurrent session number 7 starts at 1:30 p.m. and you can find the Zoom links for that sessions back on that virtual agenda page that had been emailed out. So that is all that we have.